When I think about how all of this began, it never starts with the airport. It starts with the years I spent trusting my son more than myself. But that day, I was standing under the bright departure board at JFK Airport in New York, clutching my small suitcase, believing he was coming back with coffee. Instead, I realized I was alone, with no wallet, no ID, and no way home. If you're watching this, stay with me until the end. Hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching my story from. I want to know. I had followed my son through the busy airport like a child following a parent. The noise, the screens, the long lines, they always overwhelmed me, so I let him handle everything. He took my passport and my wallet at the curb to keep them safe earlier that morning. I did not question it. I was simply happy he had finally agreed to take me to visit my sister after so many years of excuses and delays. I held my small carry-on. He held everything else. That had become the pattern of my life without me even noticing. We checked in at the machine together, or at least I thought we did. He told me to sit on a bench near the gate while he went to fix something with the booking. I watched him walk away, his shoulders relaxed, his steps steady, nothing in his body language to suggest anything was wrong. I sat and waited, listening to the rolling suitcases, the boarding calls, the crying children, feeling like a small piece in a very big machine. Time moved slowly at first. 10 minutes passed, then 20. I checked the screen again, looking for our flight time, even though I barely understood the codes. I did not see our names anywhere, but I trusted that he would come back and explain it all. When an announcement said the flight to our city was now boarding, a small, cold feeling settled in my chest. I turned in every direction, trying to catch sight of his jacket, his familiar walk, anything. There was nothing. I told myself he was stuck in a line. I held my phone tighter. I waited until the final boarding call came and went, like a door closing somewhere inside me. People rushed forward, then trickled away. The chairs near me emptied. The gate agents closed the desk, moved to another flight, and still my son did not return. The cold feeling spread from my chest to my hands. I finally opened my texts to ask where he was. There was a message waiting for me that I had not seen. It had arrived 10 minutes earlier. The words were short, sharp, like stones. He said the flight had been canceled for me. He said he had gone on without me. He said he hoped I would figure things out for once. There was no explanation, no apology, no kindness, just an ending, typed in a few cruel lines. My hands began to shake so much I almost dropped the phone. I went to the service counter, still holding on to hope that this was a mistake. The woman behind the desk asked for my ID, my booking number, my card. I had none of it. I gave her my name and my son's name. She tapped the keyboard, frowned at the screen, and then told me the worst part. The ticket in my name had been canceled. The ticket in his name had been used. He was in the sky, and I was nowhere. Around me, the airport felt louder, harsher. People brushed past without looking. I stepped away from the counter because my legs felt weak. I searched my purse even though I knew my wallet was not there. Loose tissues, a small comb, an old receipt, nothing more. No cash, no card, no identification. I checked every pocket in my coat. Again, nothing. My son had taken everything and left me like an unclaimed bag on the floor. I tried to call him, but the call rang once and went to voicemail. I tried again. This time, it went straight to voicemail, like the phone was turned off. I sent a message asking what had happened, asking why he had left me, asking how I was supposed to get home. The message marked as delivered, but never read. It sat under his earlier words like a small voice under a shout. My eyes burned, but I told myself I would not cry in front of strangers. I found an empty seat away from the gate and sat down slowly, my knees stiff. I watched families hurry to their flights, couples holding hands, business travelers walking with clear purpose. I felt like a ghost in the middle of all that life. I had no ticket, no money, no ID, and no one in that place knew my name. My own son had turned me into a nobody in a single morning. I took a deep breath and stared at my phone screen until the letters stopped blurring. It was in that hollow, frightening moment that I first noticed the old man watching me from a nearby seat, his eyes kind but sharp, as if he understood more than he should. At the time, I thought he was only another traveler passing by. I did not know yet that he would change everything. When I tried calling my son again, I already knew deep inside that the phone would keep ringing without an answer. I stood in the middle of that airport, holding the strap of my bag like it was the only thing keeping me upright. People walked around me like I was nothing important, just another older woman confused about where to go. My hands shook, not from fear alone, but from the deep hurt that spread through my chest. I kept staring at the screen, watching his name appear and disappear as the call failed again. It was in that moment that the truth finally reached me in a sharp, cold way. He was not coming back. He had left me there on purpose, and he had taken everything I needed to move, live, or even prove who I was. It wasn't an accident or a misunderstanding. It was a decision he made, quietly and confidently, knowing exactly how vulnerable I would be without my wallet, my ID, or even a single dollar. Security guards walked by, and their eyes lingered on me for a second, long enough to make me feel the weight of their suspicion. Without identification, an older woman alone in an airport looks like trouble, like someone who needs escorting out. I felt the judgment from strangers who probably assumed I had forgotten something important or that I was confused about where I needed to go. But the truth was harsher. I knew exactly what had happened. My son had abandoned me on purpose, and the realization tasted bitter. I felt a tightness in my throat as I remembered how much I had trusted him just that morning, how I had believed he would meet me at the entrance, help me with my luggage, and make sure I boarded my flight safely. Instead, he had slipped away the second I turned my back, taking my wallet from my bag without me even noticing. That thought alone made my knees feel weak. I had raised him, fed him, protected him, and this was how he repaid me, by leaving me stranded and helpless. My fingers tightened around my phone as I tried to steady myself. The more I stood there, the more the cold truth pushed into my mind. He had been growing more distant over the past months, avoiding my calls, making excuses when I asked for time together, always in a hurry, always irritated. I used to think he was stressed or overwhelmed, that he needed space. But here, in that airport, surrounded by strangers and loud announcements, I understood that his distance was not lack of time. It was lack of love. It was lack of respect. It was lack of the basic concern a child should have for a mother who once carried them and cared for them. And now, when I needed him most, when I needed even a few kind words or reassurance, I was met with nothing but silence. Panic started creeping into me slowly, like a cold wave rising over my legs. I looked around the airport for a familiar face or someone who looked kind enough to guide me, but no one made eye contact. Everyone walked past with fast steps, dragging their suitcases, checking their watches, focused on getting to their destination. And there I was, left behind on purpose, with nowhere to go and no way to prove who I was. I felt older than ever in that moment, like my age was not just a number, but a weight pressing down on me. Without my ID, I could not board a plane. Without money, I could not buy food or even a bottle of water. Without my son, I had no ride home, no explanation, no support. He had taken everything from me with one cruel choice. I sat down on a cold metal bench, holding my bag tightly against my chest. I waited for my son to call back, but deep down, I knew he would not. I realized then that the abandonment was not sudden. It was the result of many small choices he had made over time. The selfishness, the disrespect, the moments where he put his own desires above my needs. Each small decision had led to this. Me sitting alone in an airport, feeling more invisible than ever. The loudspeaker announcements echoed around me, but none of them mattered. All I could think about was how quickly a child could turn into a stranger. I felt my heart breaking piece by piece, and at the same time, a cold resolve forming beneath the hurt. I watched the doors slowly open and close as people came and went, and I knew nobody was coming for me. That was the moment I accepted the truth fully. I was alone, but I also knew something else. If he thought leaving me lost and helpless would break me forever, he underestimated the strength I had built over a lifetime. The cold realization that my son had abandoned me did not end me. It changed me. It made me understand that sometimes betrayal comes from the people we think we can trust the most. And in that empty space, I felt a new kind of strength settling inside me. Not loud, not angry, just steady. I was alone, yes, but I would not stay helpless. Not for long. I sat there in that noisy airport, the crowd moving around me like I was invisible, and my mind went back to the years that led to this moment. The years that slowly showed who my son had become. It did not happen in one day. His selfish nature grew slowly, like a small crack in a wall that spreads until the whole structure starts to shake. When he was young, I worked long hours and extra shifts to give him everything he needed. I bought his school supplies, paid for his trips, and covered his mistakes when he got in trouble. I thought I was doing it out of love, but looking back, I can see how each sacrifice gave him the idea that I would always fix everything for him. He learned to depend on my effort, but not on his own responsibility. As he got older, the requests grew bigger. It started with borrowed money he never paid back. Then it became bills he expected me to handle. Later, whenever he planned something he could not afford, he came to me with a story that made me open my wallet again. At first, I wanted to believe he was just struggling, that he needed time to grow, but the truth was simpler and harder to admit. He liked that I carried the load. He liked that when he made mistakes, I cleaned them up quietly. He liked that he did not have to face consequences, because I always stepped between him and the hard parts of life. I remember the first time he snapped at me when I said no. It was small, but it stayed in my mind. He looked at me like I owed him something. Like he deserved my help simply because he was my son. That look became more common as the years passed. Every time he had a problem, he treated me like the solution he had earned. He never asked how I was doing, never wondered if I had enough for myself. He just assumed I would find a way to give him what he wanted. When his marriage fell apart, he ran to me again, expecting a place to stay and money to restart his life. I let him move in without hesitation. I thought he needed support, but even then, I noticed how he treated my house like a hotel and me like the manager. When he left dishes in the sink, he waited for me to clean them. When bills came, he pushed them toward me without saying a word. He acted like a guest instead of someone rebuilding his life. I told myself this was temporary, but temporary turned into months, and the pattern never changed. Later, when he finally found work again, he moved out and promised to repay me. That promise disappeared the moment he settled into his new life. He avoided the topic every time I brought it up. He suddenly had things to buy, trips to take, and new hobbies that cost more than he could afford. I watched him enjoy comfort paid for by my sacrifice, and he never looked back to see how draining it had been for me. Then came the small signs that should have warned me. He started forgetting to call. He avoided visiting. When we did speak, he seemed annoyed, as if any reminder of what I had done for him was an inconvenience. He grew more distant, but only until he needed something. When he did need help, he would appear suddenly with a soft tone, trying to charm his way into my wallet again. And after he received what he wanted, he would vanish for weeks. I still kept forgiving him, telling myself he was just stressed or busy. I thought that a mother should always wait with open arms. But now, sitting in that cold airport after he abandoned me without money or identification, I saw the truth clearly. He did not leave me because he forgot. He left me because he expected me to solve everything on my own, just like always. He assumed I would figure out how to get home. He assumed I would endure whatever trouble came my way. He assumed I would be fine, even if he walked away without looking back. He believed I was his safety net, not a person. As I sat there, the memories stacked on top of each other until they formed one clear picture. He had taken from me for years, and I had allowed it because I loved him. But love without boundaries becomes weakness, and he had learned to take advantage of that weakness every time it suited him. Every moment of sacrifice, every late bill I paid, every hour I worked overtime, all of it led to this final lesson. The son I raised saw me as useful, not valuable. And now, stranded and alone in this airport, I knew that this moment was not the beginning of his betrayal. It was the end of my patience. I wish I could say my son's selfish act at the airport came out of nowhere, but the truth is that the signs were always there, small at first, then louder with time, until they became a pattern I could no longer ignore. When I sat alone on that cold airport bench, I couldn't help thinking about the long road that led me to this moment. I raised him alone after his father passed, working long hours, skipping meals, and taking extra shifts so he could have everything he wanted. I never complained. I thought that was what a mother did. I believed that if I gave enough, loved enough, and stayed strong enough, he would grow into a man with kindness in his heart. But life does not always reward good intentions, and children do not always become what we hope they will. As he got older, the small signs of entitlement began to show. He would ask for money and act offended if I said I needed a few days to arrange it. He borrowed my car and returned it empty on gas, saying he was too tired to stop at a station. He moved in and out of jobs, always blaming bosses, co-workers, traffic, weather, anything except his own actions. Whenever he failed, he came back to me, expecting food on the table and money in his account. And I always helped, thinking I was supporting him, not realizing I was teaching him that I would always fix his mistakes. When he became an adult, the pattern grew stronger. He never saved a dollar, never planned ahead, never took responsibility. Instead, he treated my small pension and savings like his safety net. When his bills piled up, he called me. When he wanted new clothes, he expected me to pay. When he wanted nights out or weekend trips, he turned to me, as if my money existed only to fund his choices. I still helped because I thought life had been hard on him and he needed support. But I did not notice how deeply he had started to see me, not as his mother, but as a resource he could use. Over time, his tone changed. He no longer asked, he demanded. He no longer thanked, he expected. He no longer visited out of love. He came only when he needed something. If I said no, even gently, he grew cold. He would disappear for weeks, then reappear pretending nothing was wrong, acting cheerful while waiting for the moment to bring up money. Each time I gave in, I lost a little more of myself. And each time he succeeded, he respected me less. I started to see how differently he treated others. His friends, co-workers, and strangers received charm and kindness. I received impatience, frustration, and a tired sigh that made me feel like a burden. He knew I loved him too much to turn him away, and he used that love like a tool. Even when he insulted me, he knew I would forgive him the moment he needed something again. I began to understand that this was no longer simple immaturity. This was a man who believed his mother existed to carry him. The worst part was that he never looked back to see how his actions affected me. He never noticed when I skipped meals so I could send him money. He never noticed the loneliness in my house when he ignored me for days. He never noticed my tired hands or aching back when he asked for help moving into yet another new apartment. He never saw the sacrifices. He only saw the benefits. When I offered to visit him more often, he refused. When I suggested planning family time, he brushed it off. When I tried to talk to him about saving money or building a stable life, he rolled his eyes and said, I wouldn't understand. Slowly, he stopped treating me like a parent and started treating me like a problem. And yet, I still believed that one day he would change. I thought he would grow older, look back, and realize how much I had done. I thought he would learn gratitude the way I had learned patience. But standing in that airport, abandoned with no money and no ID, I understood something painful but clear. He had not changed. He had only grown more comfortable hurting me. That moment, harsh as it was, forced me to confront the truth I had ignored for years. My son didn't forget me at the airport. He left me there. He didn't lose his way. He abandoned me on purpose. And the worst part wasn't the fear or the helplessness. It was realizing that he believed I would accept this the same way I had accepted all the other small betrayals before. He expected me to survive it quietly. He expected me to forgive him again. He expected me to be the same mother who always gave, always helped, always bent to his needs. He did not know that this time he had gone too far. I walked through that airport with the weight of the last few years pressing against my chest, and every step reminded me why none of this shock should have surprised me. The truth was, my son's abandonment did not start at that moment by the check-in counter. It began years earlier in small ways that I kept excusing, ignoring, or forgiving because I was his mother, and I believed he would outgrow his selfishness. But as I wandered through the noisy halls, with people rushing past me and not one familiar face in sight, all the small incidents I had buried came back piece by piece, forming a clear picture I had refused to see. I remembered the times he borrowed money and never returned it, treating my savings like a pocket he could dip into any time. I remembered the days when he would leave me waiting for hours outside his house because he forgot I was coming over, or the holidays he skipped, texting at the last minute that something came up. Each of those moments had stung, but I softened the pain by telling myself he was busy, stressed, overwhelmed. I told myself he loved me, just not with the same effort I had always given him. But now, in that airport, as I shuffled past strangers who didn't even look at me, I finally saw the pattern that had been there all along. He had stopped seeing me as his mother and started seeing me as a burden. That realization hurt in a way that felt too heavy for my old bones. The air felt colder than it should have been, and every announcement echoing overhead only made the loneliness sharper. I thought about the last birthday we spent together, when he arrived late, didn't bring a gift, and spent most of the meal scrolling on his phone. I thought about the time he pressured me to sign documents without explaining what they were, claiming it was for simplifying things. I remembered the look in his eyes back then. Not warmth, not care, but something flat, distant, almost calculating. Those little signs had been warnings, but I pushed them aside because mothers always hope their children will remain loyal, kind, and grateful. Maybe I was too hopeful. Maybe I was blind. Maybe both. As I moved across the terminal, the wheels of my suitcase rattling loudly on the tiles, I felt the old fear return. The fear of being alone and powerless. People brushed past me, some annoyed, some indifferent. One airport worker told me I couldn't sit too long on a bench. Another asked for ID I didn't have, and a few others simply ignored the trembling in my voice when I asked for help. Every interaction made me feel smaller, like I was fading into the background, forgotten and unnecessary. It was the same quiet shrinking I had been feeling for years whenever my son dismissed my thoughts or acted like my presence was an inconvenience. The same hollow ache that came when he spoke about me with irritation instead of affection. But now, with the loudspeakers echoing overhead and crowds moving like rivers around me, the ache was too big to ignore. This time, the consequences were physical. No money, no identification, no way to leave this airport. And suddenly, all the subtle disrespect of the past seemed to be leading to this one moment of complete abandonment. Every memory added another layer to the truth I didn't want to face. He had been pulling away for years, pulling back the way someone withdraws from a bank they intend to stop using, and I had been depositing love, trust, and loyalty into something that no longer valued me. I wrapped my arms around myself to keep steady as I walked. The fluorescent lights above flickered in a way that made my vision blur, and my knees felt weaker than usual. I felt like a lost child rather than the older woman I was, and yet, even in that fear, something inside me began to shift. Not anger, not revenge, not strength yet, just awareness, pure, painful awareness, the kind that opens your eyes wide even when you wish you could shut them. I kept walking until I found another bench, one where no one shooed me away immediately, and as I sat there, breathing steadily, I told myself something I had never dared admit before. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't him being forgetful. This abandonment was the final step in a long line of choices he had made. Choices that showed me exactly where I stood in his life. And now that I knew the truth, I could no longer pretend. The slow erosion had ended, and the break was complete. I sat on that cold metal bench inside the airport and felt the hours stack on my shoulders like heavy stones. At first, I kept turning my head every few minutes, thinking maybe my son would walk back around the corner. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe he had left to get something and just forgot to tell me. But as the announcements kept echoing and new crowds came and went, I realized he had planned this. He wanted me stranded. He wanted me helpless. And I had no wallet, no ID, no phone, and no way to even prove who I was. I kept replaying the moment I stepped off the escalator and expected him to be standing there. Instead, I found nothing, just empty space where a sun should have been. Now, hours later, the reality was settling deeper into my bones than the cold. Every time I tried asking an airport worker for help, they looked at me like I was confused or like I was causing trouble. One of them asked for ID before answering my question, and when I said I didn't have it, she stepped back like I was a burden she didn't want. Another simply pointed toward a line so long it stretched past a row of vending machines. I stood in that line for almost an hour only to be told they could not help me travel or leave without identification. I didn't even have money to buy a bottle of water. Hunger started to creep in slowly, like someone pressing a hand against my stomach. My legs grew sore, my back started to burn, and I could feel the stiffness building in every joint. Every seat near the food court was taken. Every corner was crowded. Every passing minute felt like a reminder of what my son had done. People walked by with luggage and families. Children pulled on their mothers' sleeves. Businessmen checked their watches. Couples complained about delays. Everyone had somewhere to be. Everyone had someone waiting for them. I had no one. I tried to steady my breathing, but with each hour slipping by, the fear slowly mixed with anger. I had raised him. I had sacrificed for him. I had given him money when he needed it. I had cooked for him when he was grown and still showed up with laundry to wash. And this was what I got in return: a cold bench, an empty stomach, a hollow ache inside my chest that felt heavier than any suitcase in the building. I felt embarrassed sitting there because I knew how I looked. An older woman with no belongings, no direction, trying to hide the fact that she had been abandoned. People glanced at me and then looked away, trying not to get involved. I could feel my pride shrinking a little every minute, but I refused to cry in front of strangers. Pride was all I had left. Still, the exhaustion was growing. My eyes stung. My throat felt tight. My hands trembled each time I tried to steady myself or fix my sweater. Airports are loud, but I sat in silence inside my own mind, hearing every painful truth louder than the crowds around me. My son had done this on purpose. He had left me with nothing. He wanted to teach me some lesson, or punish me, or break me in a way he thought I couldn't undo. The more the hours passed, the more my hope drained. I tried pacing, but my legs hurt. I tried sitting still, but my heart raced. I tried resting my eyes, but fear jolted me every time someone walked too close. The loudspeaker called out flights I couldn't take. People rolled suitcases I didn't have. Families reunited with hugs I would not receive. It was an airport full of motion, yet I was stuck in place, like everything around me moved except me. The cold bench became my world. The ache in my feet became my new weight. And the truth about my son settled into every part of me until it was impossible to ignore. I felt hopeless. I felt invisible. And most of all, I felt like the last piece of trust I had left in my son had finally snapped in half. But even in that weakness, somewhere quiet inside me, a small thought started to form. If I survived this moment, he would never hold this kind of power over me again. I sat there on that cold airport bench, feeling smaller than I had in years. People rushed past me, rolling their bags, talking on phones, laughing about vacations, complaining about delays. It all felt like noise I no longer belonged to. I had no money, no ID, no way to prove who I was. My son had taken everything when he walked away and left me standing alone in that huge terminal. I kept replaying the moment in my head, trying to understand how he had become a person who could abandon his own mother. I thought of all the years I raised him alone, all the nights I stayed awake to make sure he was safe, all the meals I skipped so he could have enough. None of it seemed to matter now. He left me like a forgotten bag someone tosses aside. Hours passed, and the weight of everything began to settle in my chest. My back hurt from sitting on the hard bench. My hands were shaking from hunger. The lights above buzzed loudly, and the airport announcements only made me more aware of everything I lacked. People around me moved with purpose, scanning boarding passes, dragging suitcases, handing over IDs, doing things that required documents I no longer had. Every time I watched someone hand over their ID to an agent, a small wave of panic ran over me. I had nothing to show anyone, nothing to prove my identity, nothing to help me get even a bottle of water. I began to feel like the world had turned into a place with doors that only opened for people with the right cards. At some point, I must have looked so lost that a young woman slowed her steps when she passed me. She glanced at me with concern, but she walked away quickly, pretending she wasn't staring. I didn't blame her. Most people were too busy to stop. They had their own problems, their own flights, their own families. I was just an old woman sitting alone. I could feel tears building behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Crying would make me look weaker, and weakness had already cost me too much. That was when I noticed the man sitting across from me. I had not seen him before, but suddenly he was there, calm, and watching me like he had been studying me for a while. He was elderly, maybe close to my age, with kind eyes and a slow, steady breath. He wore a simple jacket and held a newspaper in his hands, folded neatly. He didn't stare at me the way others did. He looked at me like he understood what it felt like to be stranded. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then he leaned slightly forward, as if he was reading something on my face that I didn't even know was written there. He didn't speak loudly, he didn't even move his lips much. He whispered softly, almost like the words were meant to float only a few inches. The sound barely reached me, but it was enough. He said I should pretend to be M. The rest of the name was quiet, but the meaning was clear. He was giving me a role, a way to step into something that could help me survive this moment, a way to get help when I had none. At first, I didn't understand why he would offer such advice. I didn't know him. He didn't know me, but his eyes told me he recognized something: fear, desperation, the way a person looks when they have no options left. I turned my head away for a moment, letting his words sink in. It felt strange, risky, almost unreal, but I had spent the entire day searching for help, and every door had been closed. At that point, whatever plan he hinted at was better than sitting there waiting for someone to call security on me for looking lost. I took a slow breath and tried to calm my shaking hands. I felt the weight of exhaustion lifting slightly, replaced by something smaller but stronger: hope. Even if it came from a stranger, hope was still hope. His eyes stayed steady on me, as if waiting for me to decide, and I did. I turned back, nodding slightly, letting him know I understood. His gaze softened, and he gave a single small nod back. No one else noticed the exchange. No one else saw the moment an old woman with nothing left decided to stand up again. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was just a quiet shift inside me, the kind that comes when you finally realize you cannot wait for rescue. You must create your own way out. For the first time since my son walked away, I felt something come back into my chest. Not joy, not confidence, but strength. A strength I thought I had lost. And all because an elderly man whispered a simple idea that gave me a chance to reclaim myself. I stood up slowly, holding on to the armrest of the bench, preparing to follow the plan that would change everything that came after. I sat there for a long moment after the elderly man whispered his strange idea to me. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. I wondered if stress had pushed me too far, if exhaustion had made me imagine things, or if I was desperate enough to consider anything. But as I felt the cold bench under me and watched people move past with purpose, confidence, and safety I no longer had, his words settled inside me with surprising clarity. I realized I had two options: stay where I was, helpless and ignored, or stand up and try something bold. My whole life, I had been careful, quiet, and polite, but right then, none of that was helping me. So I decided I would try the one thing I had never tried before, taking control when everything felt lost. I stood up slowly, testing my balance, trying to gather myself after hours of waiting and wandering. My legs were stiff from sitting, and my hands were trembling from hunger and fear. But I took a deep breath and repeated the plan silently in my head until it felt steady. I looked around to see if the man was still nearby, but he had disappeared into the crowd. That made the plan feel even more mysterious. Almost like a strange blessing from someone who understood what it meant to be forgotten. I straightened my jacket, wiped my face clean, and moved toward the counter with a confidence I didn't actually feel. The plan required me to act like I belonged there, like I had the authority and the right to ask for help without begging. When I approached the staff, I kept my steps slow and firm. I didn't let them see fear. I didn't let them see confusion. I tried to carry myself the way the elderly man instructed, calm, sure, and focused. I started speaking in a steady tone, explaining that I needed assistance for a situation that required verification. I didn't mention my son, or my missing wallet, or the humiliation I had felt all morning. The plan was simple. Give only what was necessary. Leave out anything that made me look weak. I saw the staff glance at each other, studying me, trying to decide who they thought I was. For the first time since arriving at the airport, I didn't feel like an old woman lost in a sea of strangers. I felt like someone who had business to handle. The staff listened with more attention than before. They pulled up systems, checked information, and tried to follow procedures. They asked questions. But thanks to the old man's plan, I knew how to answer them in a way that didn't raise suspicion. I kept everything short, simple, and direct. Confidence can be a strange kind of language. People respond differently when they think you know what you're talking about. The more calmly I spoke, the more seriously they took me. When one worker hesitated, I held my ground. When another questioned something, I stayed quiet until he continued. The strategy worked better than I could have imagined. After a few minutes, they asked me to wait while they checked with supervisors. Normally, waiting would have filled me with dread. But this time, I felt steady. I stood near the desk with my back straight and my hands still. I watched staff members rush back and forth, making calls, checking files, and discussing quietly. I had no idea if the plan would work fully, but I could already see it pushing open doors that had been slammed shut earlier. People who ignored me before were now giving me space, respect, and attention. All because I followed a stranger's advice and refused to look defeated. When the supervisor arrived, I felt a spike of fear, but I didn't let it show. He asked a few short questions, and each time I answered with the same calm tone. No begging, no panic, no long explanations. Just the simple plan the old man gave me. The supervisor nodded and instructed the staff to help me further. Suddenly, I wasn't a lost woman without ID. I wasn't a burden or an inconvenience. I was someone they had to assist. As they guided me to a private desk, I realized I was finally moving forward after hours of being stuck in fear. The exhaustion didn't disappear, but something stronger took its place. A quiet sense of power I hadn't felt in a long time. I couldn't change what my son had done. I couldn't force him to care, but I could survive without him. I could reclaim control on my own terms. When they began printing temporary documents and arranging further verification steps, I felt my eyes sting with relief. Not because everything was solved yet, but because I had taken action. I had chosen to move instead of collapse. I had used a stranger's risky plan and turned it into a lifeline. And in that moment, I realized something important. Sometimes help comes from unexpected places, and sometimes strength appears only when you're truly abandoned. I wasn't safe yet, but I wasn't helpless anymore. When the security team approached me, their faces were tight, and their eyes carried the same doubt I had already seen all day. They stood around me in a half circle, waiting for me to slip, waiting for me to confess that I didn't belong here, waiting for me to fall apart like they expected an old woman with no ID and no money to do. But I didn't fall apart. I remembered the stranger's voice, low and steady, telling me exactly how to speak, how to carry myself, how to claim a level of authority that would make them stop questioning and start listening. So when they asked me for the third time who I was waiting for, I didn't stutter, I didn't panic, and I didn't show fear. I kept my shoulders straight, I kept my eyes calm, and I said the words the old man told me to say, slowly, firmly, clearly. The room changed the moment the words left my mouth. The agents exchanged glances that weren't about suspicion anymore. They were about caution. They stepped back slightly, as if a line had been drawn between us, a line they were suddenly afraid to cross. But the change in their posture didn't erase the tension. They wanted proof. They wanted something more than a voice. So they asked again, this time more carefully, trying not to offend me while also trying not to make a mistake. They wanted clarification, confirmation, explanation. And again, I gave them only what the old man instructed me to give. Short answers, confident tone, no extra details. Details invite questions, he had said. Questions create traps. And right now, I couldn't afford a single trap. Not when my entire world had been turned upside down by my own son. So when the main officer leaned forward, asking if I needed assistance, I nodded like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like this wasn't the first moment of real help I had been offered in hours. He gestured for me to follow him, and I walked with slow, controlled steps, remembering not to rush, not to look lost, not to look like a woman who had been abandoned at an airport by her only child. Instead, I looked like someone who expected respect, someone who expected cooperation, someone who expected doors to open, and they did. They took me past the long lines, through a secured hallway, toward a smaller office where more staff waited, watching me with the same careful caution. One of them offered me water. Another asked if I needed a place to sit. Their tone had changed completely. Soft, polite, almost nervous. I sat down slowly, feeling the first hint of safety since the moment I realized my son had left me on purpose. But the safety didn't erase the anger building inside me. It didn't erase the humiliation of standing alone in the middle of a crowded airport. It didn't erase the look on my son's face when he walked away as if I meant nothing. And it didn't erase the truth. This wasn't the first time he had used me, ignored me, or treated me like a burden. This was just the first time he had taken it this far. One of the staff members asked me to confirm a piece of information, and I answered exactly as instructed. They nodded quickly, writing everything down, moving with urgency, as if they were afraid of getting something wrong. When more supervisors entered the room, they lowered their voices. They looked at me with respect they hadn't shown anyone else in the hallway. While they whispered among themselves, my phone buzzed in my pocket. The same phone that had felt like a stone all day. It was my son, the boy I raised, the boy I fed, clothed, protected, defended. The boy who walked away from me without a second thought. His name glowed on the screen, and I felt a cold wave move through me. He must have discovered I wasn't stranded anymore. Maybe the panic had set in. Maybe someone had told him what happened. Maybe he realized leaving me with no wallet, no ID, and no support was more dangerous than he thought. But I didn't answer. Not yet. I sat quietly as the officers returned to me with a stack of papers. Papers that opened more doors. Papers that granted temporary access. Papers that placed me under protection. Papers that reversed every piece of power my son thought he had taken from me. And when I finally turned the phone over and watched his name disappear from the screen, I felt something shift in me. Not fear, not sorrow, not confusion. Something stronger, something clearer, something that felt like the beginning of the end. My end with him, and his end of taking advantage of me. So when the head officer asked if I needed anything else, I took a breath and finally said the words I had been holding in my chest all day. Words that weren't part of the old man's plan, words that came from me alone. Yes, I said, I need to make one call, and then I need a ride home. Because now, the ultimatum wasn't for me, it was for the son who abandoned me. When the plan finally worked, it felt like my whole body loosened for the first time that day. I had followed every step that old man told me, even when my hands were shaking and my voice wanted to break. But in the end, the airport staff didn't see me as some lost old woman anymore. They saw confidence. They saw someone who belonged. They saw someone they shouldn't ignore. And once they believed me, everything changed. 1 minute earlier, I had been invisible, sitting alone with no wallet, no phone, and no ID. A mother abandoned by her own son. The next minute, an airport manager was guiding me to a private room, offering me water, asking me what assistance I needed, and checking flight options. I sat there and breathed for the first time all day. For hours, I had been walking like a ghost, but now, suddenly, I existed again. And the best part was, my son had no idea how much control I had regained. They made calls on my behalf, checked the passenger list, and even flagged my son's name. They asked if he had intentionally left me without identification. When I answered slowly and honestly, I saw their faces change. They weren't just helping me because I looked weak. They were helping me because now it looked like a crime had been committed. That subtle shift in their behavior felt like justice already forming under my feet. They arranged temporary identification, contacted the local authorities for verification, and gave me access to emergency support for stranded passengers. By the time I was done giving all the details, I had food, shelter in the lounge, and flight protection. They didn't charge me a single dollar. I didn't beg. I didn't cry. I just followed the plan with steady breath after steady breath. And right when I finally sat down in the quiet lounge, my phone, the temporary one they had provided, began to ring. It was my son. His name flashing across the screen felt like poison at first, but then I realized something important. He wasn't calling out of guilt. He was calling because he needed something. That man only ever called when he needed something. I answered anyway, not out of softness, but because I wanted to hear what excuse he would use. And just as I expected, he didn't ask if I was safe. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain why he left me in the middle of an airport like trash. Instead, his voice came through the speaker full of fake frustration, blaming me for walking off, saying he couldn't babysit me forever. The words made my stomach twist, but this time, the fear was gone. I wasn't helpless anymore. I wasn't stranded. I wasn't abandoned. I had already survived what he tried to destroy. He kept talking, but I didn't respond. I let him hear silence. I let him hear how little power he had over me now. When he finally said, "Where are you?" I almost laughed. He thought I would be crying in some airport corner, desperate and powerless. Instead, I was sitting in a warm chair, drinking water I didn't have to pay for, holding documents he never expected me to get, surrounded by people who were now helping me, and watching him through an official lens. I didn't argue with him. I didn't explain anything. I simply said, "I am safe," and then I hung up, because he didn't deserve to know anything else. That silence was my revenge. While he was probably pacing, trying to figure out why his plan failed, the airport staff filed a formal report about what happened. They handed me paperwork that documented everything: how I was left without ID, how I had no money, how I was abandoned by the person supposed to assist me. They explained that my son could face consequences, especially since it involved interstate travel and potential elder neglect. I didn't ask them to do any of it. They simply did what was right. And that was the moment I understood something deeper. Sometimes revenge isn't loud. Sometimes revenge is simply surviving, rebuilding your dignity, and letting the truth expose the person who tried to break you. And as I prepared to board the next safe flight home, one arranged by the airport and verified by authorities, I finally realized how strong I truly was. I didn't need him. I didn't need his control. I didn't need his approval. I had myself. I had my mind. I had strangers willing to help when my own blood refused to. And that was worth more than anything he ever tried to take from me. When everything was finally over and I sat alone in my own living room, the weight of the past hours started to settle in my chest. I had made it home from that airport with nothing but my own will, a stranger's quiet guidance, and the truth of what my son had done. I looked around at the familiar furniture, the soft light, the calm silence, and I felt a strange mix of peace and sadness. My life had changed in one day, and nothing about the way I saw my son, the world, or myself would ever be the same again. I had lived through many hard moments in my life, but being abandoned by my own child in a crowded airport with no money, no ID, and no support was a pain that cut deeper than any other wound I had carried. I kept thinking about the old man who had whispered that strange plan to me. He didn't owe me anything. He didn't know me, but he saw me suffering, and he acted with kindness that my own son could not offer. I thought about that for a long time. How a stranger showed more care in one moment than a son did in years. It forced me to rethink the entire meaning of family. Blood may connect us, but actions reveal who truly belongs in our heart. Sometimes the people we give everything to are the ones who turn away when we need them most. And sometimes help comes from people who owe us nothing at all. When I got home, I realized something important. My son walking away was not a sudden act. It had been building for years. The small disrespect, the sharp comments, the careless way he treated me like a burden. I had ignored every sign because I wanted to believe that love would fix everything. But love without respect is only pain stretched over time. I gave him chance after chance, and every time he proved that he saw me not as his mother, but as someone to use. Standing in that airport with nothing forced me to face the truth I had avoided for too long. He had abandoned me long before he physically walked away. In the days that followed, I made choices I should have made years ago. I sat with my lawyer. I checked every account, every shared responsibility, every detail of my future. I made sure that the son who left me helpless would never again control a single piece of my life. I learned to protect myself, to plan for myself, and to let go of the fear that had kept me silent. I didn't do it to punish him. I did it because I finally understood the value of my own safety, my own peace, and my own worth. I could not give those things away anymore. My son did call eventually. He pretended nothing had happened. He acted like leaving me behind was a small misunderstanding. I listened, but I didn't let his words pull me back into the old cycle. I had survived without him, and I could continue to do so. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I spoke calmly, clearly, and with the strength that had carried me home. I told him the truth, that I needed distance, that I needed peace, and that I would not allow him to treat me as if I was disposable ever again. It was not revenge. It was a boundary long overdue. As the weeks passed, something strange happened. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel the same sharp heartbreak. Instead, I felt a slow, steady sense of strength building inside me. A kind of freedom I had never felt before. I understood now that I hadn't lost a son that day at the airport. I had lost the illusion of who I wanted him to be, and sometimes losing an illusion is painful, but necessary. It leaves room for truth, for clarity, and for a new way of living. I started rebuilding my life. I took small steps each day to regain confidence. I went out more. I met new people. I allowed myself to find comfort in simple routines. I let go of old fears, and slowly I began to feel whole again. My son's betrayal no longer defined me. My survival did. My choices did. The courage I found inside a crowded airport did. When I look back now, I don't think of the fear first. I think of the moment I realized I could depend on myself. I think of the stranger who helped me find a way out. I think of the strength that rose inside me when no one else stepped in. The lesson was not about abandonment. It was about rediscovery. I learned that I am stronger than I thought. I learned that independence is not selfish. It is necessary. I learned that respect must be demanded, not begged for. And I learned that even when heartbreak comes from blood, healing can come from within. In the end, the moral of everything I lived through is simple. When someone shows you they will abandon you, don't chase them. Stand up. Walk forward. Protect your life. Because the moment you choose yourself is the moment you truly begin again.